Hello students, welcome to our online classes. I am Mrs. Nehal More and today we are going to learn chapter 3rd of history. The name of the lesson, in the earliest cities. I repeat again, in the earliest cities. This is really very interesting topic. You are going to enjoy today's session, dear children. Now where does this idea come from? Okay, let's see it. In the earliest cities, saving an old building. Jaspal and Harpreet were playing cricket in the lane outside their home when they noticed the people who were admiring a dilapidated old building that the children called the haunted house. Look at the architecture, said one of them. Have you seen the fine wood carving? Asked one of the women. We must write to the minister so that she makes arrangements to repair and preserve this beautiful house. Why, they wondered, would anybody be interested in the old run down house? Now, you must be wondering that why people are interested in the history, means why they are interested in the old houses, old sites of the archaeological sites, because we learn about our ancestors, we learned about the history of our country. So this is very important, dear children. Okay, now the story of Harappa. The story of Harappa. Very often, old buildings have a story to tell. Nearly 150 years ago, when railway lines were being laid down for the first time in Punjab, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa in present day Pakistan. To them, it seemed like a mound that was a rich source of ready-made high-quality bricks. So they carried off thousands of bricks from the walls of the old buildings of the city to build railway lines. Many buildings were completely destroyed. Then, about 80 years ago, archaeologists found the site and realized that this was one of the oldest cities in the subcontinent, and this was the first city to be discovered. All other sites from where similar buildings and other things were found and described as Harappan. These cities developed about 4700 years ago. So, how was the Harappan city discovered? When the railway lines were being laid down for the first time in Punjab, engineers found there are high quality of bricks under the ground. So, they used this high quality of bricks to lay down the railway track. After some years, after the 80 years, then about 80 years ago, the archaeologists found this site. They realized, what they realized, that this is the oldest site in the subcontinent and the first city to be discovered. This is the first city which is discovered, and this is the oldest city which has been discovered up till now, and they named it as Harappa. Okay, this city was 4700 years ago. Okay, now what is special about these cities? Many of these cities were divided into two or more parts. Usually the part of the west was smaller but higher. Archaeologists describe this as citadel. Now what is? They were divided into the two parts. Cities was divided into the two parts. That was, the first part was the west part, which was smaller but was located on the high ground. Okay, means higher from the ground. Generally, the part of the east was larger but lower. This was called the lower town. The higher part was smaller and was located in the western part, whereas the lower part was huge and was located in the eastern part. For example, dear children, see now, here in the western part, the higher part was on the top, whereas the lower part was bigger. The higher part houses were here in the small amount, whereas the lower part was huge, this way. Understood? So, the archaeologists divide it into two parts, the western part and the eastern part. The western part and the eastern part. Western part, it was higher, and eastern part they were lower. Eastern part was bigger and western part was smaller. Understood, dear children? Okay, now very often walls of the bricks were built around each part. The bricks were so well built that they have lasted for 1000 years. Imagine the bricks which were built, which were created 4700 years ago, till today they exist. Means see the quality of the bricks, dear children. Bricks were laid in interlocking pattern that made the walls stronger. They were laid in the interlocking pattern, due to which the walls were strongly built. Okay, in some cities special buildings were constructed on the citadel. In some cities special buildings were constructed on the citadel. For example, in Mohenjo-daro, a very special tank which archaeologists call a great bath was built in this area. This was lined with bricks, coated with plaster and made watertight with a layer of natural tar. There were steps leading down to it from two sides, while there were rooms on all the sides. Water probably was brought from the well and drained out after use. Perhaps important people used important people took a dip in this tank on the special occasions. This kind of a huge great bath is found during the excavation, and it is so beautifully and well built. So it is built with a lined bricks, and it is coated with the plaster, and also it's a water tight with the layer of natural tar, and there are steps. Can you see your steps going inside? There are steps going inside, and it is surrounded by the rooms from all the sides. It's having rooms from all the sides. There was a facility for the water to be brought in, also the water to be drained out. So see the technique, okay, at that time. Other cities such as Kalibangan and Lothal had fire altars where sacrifices may have been performed, and some cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa and Lothal had elaborate store houses. So these are the special things which the cities at that time had. For example, the great bath, or the altars, or what to say, storehouses. Okay, these were the speciality of the cities at that time. Now, houses, drains and streets. Generally, houses were either 1 or 2 stories high with room built around the courtyard. Most houses had a separate bathing area and had wells to supply water. Every house had a well. See, generally the houses were 1 story or 2. Okay, that means one floor or 2 floors. Okay, and the rooms were built around the courtyard. The rooms in between, there is a courtyard. In courtyard means angan. Okay, in between there is a courtyard, and the rooms were built around it, and the houses had a separate bathing area, and the wells were also there in each house for the supply of water. Next, many of these cities covered drains. See, at that time they had a covered drains. Covered drains means whatever waste water comes from our house, for which we use in toilets, which we use for bathing, which we use to clean our clothes, utensils, whatever dirty water comes from our house, they had a specific system for it. And it also was covered. It was not lying outside anyhow. The water is going and it's dirty. No, it was covered. That means how clean and healthy and hygienic those people were before 4700 years ago. Many of these cities had covered drains. Notice how carefully these were laid out in straight lines. Although you cannot see it, each drain had a gentle slope so that water could flow through it. Very often, drains in houses were connected to those of the streets, and smaller drains led into the bigger ones. As the drains were covered, inspection holes were provided at intervals to clean them. All three houses, drains, and streets were probably planned and built at the same time. See what a beautiful plan they were having at that time. The drainage system was there, perfect drainage system, which was built in a straight line, and they were given gentle slope so that the water will not stay at one place. It will go down in the bigger drainage. Okay, smaller drainage were connected to the bigger drainage, and the bigger drainage ultimately was laid out. Okay, so this was the system at that time. Life in the city. Now, how was the life in that city? The Harappan city was a very busy place. There were people who planned the construction of special buildings in the cities. These were probably the rulers. It was likely that rulers sent people to distant land to get metal, precious stones, and other things that they wanted. They may have kept the most valuable objects such as ornaments of gold and silver or beautiful beads for themselves. And there were scribes, people who knew how to write, who helped prepare the seals and perhaps wrote on another material that have not survived. See, at that time also they were planning about the special buildings, how to build, and mostly the rulers were planning how to build the special buildings in the city. And they were also having the valuable objects such as gold, ornaments of gold, silver, beautiful beads, right? And some of them knew how to write, and they were writing on the seals, right? Now, besides, there were women and men, crafts persons making all kinds of tea, either in their own homes or in a special workshop. People were traveling to distant land or returning with raw material and perhaps stories. Many terracotta toys have been found, and children must have played with these. See, these kind of toys. Can you observe here? This kind of toys, terracotta toys, are found with and the children used to play with it. Understood? Okay. now top Now this is one image from your book. The stone weights, these are the stone, these weights were used. How we today we are using 250 gram, 500 gram, or 10 gram, 5 grams for gold, silver. Okay, so these were this kind of weights were used to weigh the valuable or precious metals. Okay, now notice how carefully and precisely these weights are shaped. These were made of chert, a kind of a stone. These were probably used to weigh precious stones and metals. Okay. Now, new crafts in the city. Let us look at some of the objects that were made and found in Harappan cities. Most of the things that have been found by the archaeologists are made of stone, shell, and metal, including copper, bronze, gold, and silver. Copper and bronze were used to make tools, weapons, ornaments, and vessels. Gold and silver were used to make ornaments and vessels. Perhaps the most striking finds are those of the beads, weights, and the blades. So these kind of beads, blades, then weights or ornaments of copper, bronze, silver, gold were found during the excavation. At that time also, these all metals were being used very beautifully by the people. Cotton was probably grown at Mehergarh from about 7,000 years ago. Mehergarh site we have learned in the last session, right? Last lesson we have learnt about it. Actual pieces of cloth were found attached to the lid of silver vase and some copper objects at Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists have also found the spindle rolls made of terracotta and faience. These were used to spin thread. Many of the things that were produced were probably the work of specialists. The specialist is a person who is trained to do only one kind of work. For example, cutting stone or polishing bead or carving silk. Okay, now cotton. Cotton was grown in Mehergarh. That means cotton was brought in Harappan or Mohenjo-daro from Mehergarh. That is 7,000 years ago. Can you imagine? 7,000 years ago. And the pieces of cotton cloths are attached. They are found in the excavation, during the excavation in the silver vase. Okay. And some copper objects at Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists have found spindle rolls. Since spindle rolls means with which we weave the cotton into the cloth, and also they are made from terracotta and faience. Now, what is faience? We will look further. See, now there was also specialists. Specialists were there. Specialists were appointed who were the trained people to work for one kind of work. For example, some people were trained for cutting stones, some were trained for polishing beads, some were trained for carving seals, and so on. Not everybody could have been the specialist, right? We do not know whether only men were specialists or only women were specialists. Perhaps some men or some women must have been specialists. Okay. Now, what is faience? Now, what is faience? We have heard the word about it. No, unlike stone or shell that are found naturally, faience is a material that is artificially produced. Now, stones or shells are found naturally, but faience is a material which is artificially produced. A gum was used to shape sand or powdered quartz into an object. The object which was then glazed, resulting into a shiny glassy surface. The colors of the glaze were usually blue or sea green. Faience was used to make beads, bangles, earrings and tiny vessels. Okay, understood, dear children? This was an artificial material which was a gum. It was actually a gum which was used to shape a sand or powdered quartz into an object, and this object were resulting into a shiny or glassy surface. And what was made from it? Beads, bangles, earrings, tiny vessels and such things were made from it. Okay, in search of raw material. Now, this was very important. Raw material is very important, right? Raw materials are substances that are either found naturally, such as wood or ores from the metal, or produced by farmers or herders. These are then processed to produce finished good. For example, cotton produced by farmer is a raw material, and that may be processed to make cloth, while some of the raw materials that Harappan used were available locally. Many items such as copper, tin, gold, silver, precious stones had to be brought from distant places. Now, raw materials was available naturally, or some have to be produced by farmers or herders. If it was not available in the city, it was brought from outside the city. The Harappan probably got copper from present day Rajasthan. The Harappan people brought copper from Rajasthan and even from Oman in the West Asia. Tin, which was mixed with the copper to produce bronze, was brought from Afghanistan or Iran. Gold could have come from the way of Karnataka, and the precious stones came from Gujarat, Iran and Afghanistan. So these all raw materials were brought from distinct places. Okay. Food. Now, what they had, what they ate. Why? Many people lived in the cities, others lived in the countryside, grew crops and reared animals. These farmers and herders supplied foods to craft persons, scribes and rulers in the cities. We know from the remains of plants that Harappans grew wheat, barley, pulses, peas, rice, sesame, linseed and mustard. Now, what did they eat? They ate wheat, barley, pulses, peas, rice, sesame, linseed, mustard. How do we know this? Because they have obtained the remains of plant from the archaeological sites. Okay, the new tool, the plow, was used to dig the earth from turning the soil and planting seeds, while the real plow, which was probably made of wood, have not survived. The toy models have been found at these regions does not receive heavy rainfall. Some from irrigation may have been used. This means the water was stored and supplied to the field when the plants were growing. The water was stored and then it was supplied to the field. Okay, the Harappan reared cattle. They also reared cattle, sheep, goat and buffalo. Water and the pastures were available around the settlements. However, in the dry summer months, large herds of animals were probably taken to the greater distance in the search of grass and water. They also collected fruits. Okay. Now the closer look to the Harappan towns in Gujarat. Now let us study about the Harappan towns in Gujarat. The city of Dholavira was located in the Khadir Belt, also spelled as Bet, in the run of Kutch, where there was fresh water and fertile soil. Unlike some of the other Harappan cities, which was divided into two parts, Dholavira was divided into three parts, and each part was surrounded with massive stone walls with entrances through gateways. There was also a large open area in the settlement where public ceremonies could be held. Another finds includes large letters of the Harappan script. There was carved out of white stone and perhaps inlaid in wood. This is a unique find as generally Harappan writings have been found on small objects such as seals. So, the Dholavira was divided into three parts, and each part was surrounded with a huge stone walls, and they were very strong. And each part was having a gate to enter, and there was also a huge open place where the public ceremonies were held. And also, the finds include the large letter of Harappan script, which was carved on the white stone, carved out of white stone and perhaps on the wood. And this is a unique find, as generally Harappan writings are found on the small objects as seals. Now, the city of Lothal stood beside the tributary of Sabarmati in Gujarat, close to the Gulf of Khambat. It was situated near areas where raw materials such as semi precious stones were easily available. This was an important center for making objects out of stone, shell, and metal. There was also a storehouse in the city. Many seal and sealings, the impressions of the seals on the clay, are found in this storehouse. See, can you observe here the dockyard of Lothal? This huge tank may have been a dockyard where boats and ships came from the sea and through the river channel. Goods were probably loaded and unloaded here. The city of Lothal stood beside the tributary of Sabarmati in Gujarat, and the semi-precious stones were easily found here, and it was the important center of making objects of stones, shells, and metals. There was also a storehouse in the cities, and many kinds of seals and sealings, that means the impression of seals were of clay, are also found in the storehouse. Now, what is seals and sealings? Seals may have been used to stamp bags or packets containing goods that were sent from one place to another. Now, today also we use the seals for the same reason, right? Because seals are used to stamp bags or packets containing goods that were sent from one place to another. After a bag was closed or tied, a layer of the wet clay was applied on the knot and the seal was pressed on it. The impression of the seal is known as a sealing. If the sealing was intact, one could be sure that the good has arrived safely. How they ensured the safety of the good? What they used to do? They used to put all the material which they want to transport from one place to another, and they used to put that material in a bag, and on that bag they tied the bag, on that they applied the wet clay. They applied the layer of the wet clay which was applied on the knot, and the seal was pressed on it, and the impression of the seal is known as a sealing, and this was done to ensure the safety of the good. Even today we are using it. So, the mystery of the end. Around 3000, how did this Harappan cities ended? So, there is a mystery about it. Around 3900 years ago, we find the beginning of major change. People stopped living in many of the cities. Writing, seals, and the weights were no longer used. Raw materials brought from distances became rare. In Mohenjo-daro, we find the garbage piled up on the streets. The drainage systems broke down and new, less impressive houses were built, even over the streets. Why did all this happen? We are not sure. Some scholars suggest that rivers dried up. Others suggest that there was deforestation. This could have been happened because fuel was required for baking bricks and for smelting copper ores, besides grazing by larger herds of cattle, sheep, and goat may have destroyed the green over. In some areas there were floods, but none of this reason can explain the end of all cities. Flooding or a river drying up would have an effect in only some areas. So nobody knows how does the Harappan or Mohenjo-daro cities ended up. See, because many of the scientists, what they say, that due to deforestation, the city must have ended up, or there must have been flood over there. But the flood will come in one city; it will not go beyond that, right? So how did all the cities vanished? What is the reason that each and every city was vanished at a time? So nobody knows till now. There is a big mystery of the end of Harappan and Mohenjo-daro civilization. Okay, it appears as if rulers lost control in the case. The effects of the change were quite clear. Sites in Sindh and West Bengal were abandoned, while many peoples moved into the newer, smaller settlement to the east and the south. New cities emerged about 1400 years later. You will read about them in chapter 5 and 8. It appears that it also must have been happened that the rulers must have lost control over their kingdom, and the people living there must have moved into a newer and smaller settlements. Okay, we will learn about them in chapter number 5 and 8. One more thing here also, elsewhere, find Egypt in your atlas. Most of Egypt is a dry desert except for the land along the river Nile. Around 5000 years ago, kings ruled over Egypt. These kings sent armies to distinct lands to get gold, silver, ivory, timber, and precious stones. See, around 5000 years ago, kings ruled over Egypt, and these kings sent their armies to the faraway land. Why? To get gold, silver, ivory, timber, and precious stone. They also built huge tombs known as pyramids. And when they died, the bodies of the kings were preserved and buried in these pyramids. Now everybody knows about the pyramids, right? When the king used to die, their body used to be buried and preserved in the pyramids. These carefully preserved bodies are known as mummies, and these bodies which are preserved are known as mummies. A large number of objects were buried with them. This included food, drinks, clothes, ornaments, utensils, musical instruments, weapons, animals, and sometimes even the serving men. The people who used to serve the kings in the palace, they were also buried with the king. Okay, and serving men and women were buried with the rulers. These are amongst the most elaborate burials known in the world history. So this is also kind of interesting history where we will learn about pyramids in the Egypt. Okay, children, for today's homework we have completed with this chapter. I hope you have found this chapter interesting, and our homework is also going to be very interesting. Your homework is you are going to watch a Mohenjo-daro film which is of Hrithik Roshan, and you will relate each and every scene with whatever we have learned today, and you will write about the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro civilization in your own words, what you understood or what you knew about it. Okay, so whatever you learnt about it, for example, what they ate, or how the city was constructed, what all agricultural crops were grown over there. Okay, the great bath, whatever things you find interesting, you can mention it in your book. Okay, so this is what for your homework. I will also send PDF of question answers on the group. Okay, thank you for watching. Thank you and have a nice day. Thank you.